Welcome back, Agile Mentors. We're back for another episode of the Agile Mentors podcast. I'm here, as always, Brian Milner, and I have the original founder back with us, Mike Cohn. Welcome back in, Mike.
Hi, Brian. It's good to see you.
Really glad, as always, to have Mike here when he can make time for us, because Mike has so much wisdom and knowledge to share, and especially on the topic that we have for today. We wanted to talk here in this new year a little bit about estimating and planning, and really kind of dive into that topic in general, and why that still is important, why it still matters here in our current day and age. So I guess, Mike, I'll start with this. I know estimating is sort of an emotionally charged topic a little bit. Why do you think it remains such an emotionally charged topic in the Agile community and just in teams when it comes up?
That's a good question. I made a silly little YouTube video years ago where I bought a styrofoam 5 and I think a styrofoam 8. They were pretty big styrofoam numbers. They're for kindergarten rooms or something like that. And we had this video of a guy dressed like a manager beating up a developer with the 5 and the 8 that were representing estimates, right? And I think a part of it is because that's most developers' experience with estimates. They give an estimate and they're beat up with it, right? You're wrong and you can't win, right? You give an estimate and if you make it, nobody says good job. They just go on their day. And if you miss it, you get beat up with it, right? And so we were beating people up with these styrofoam numbers. And so it becomes this very emotionally charged thing because I think a lot of developers don't see what's in it for me, right? What's in it for me with an estimate? And so they're just kind of get opposed to it, and they've been beat up by too many bad managers with estimates in the past.
Yeah, I try to explain that to people in classes sometimes that, as a developer, as a past developer, I know like we're always looking for the stick, right? The stick is around the corner and we don't know how far around the corner, but we know that we're going to get beat at some point, and we're just a little leery that this might be just another way to facilitate the beatings, if you will.
Yeah.
I know one of there's a lot of different thoughts and opinions on this in the Agile community. There's the no estimates movement and the planning, that kind of thing. What do you notice that people are reacting really against when they argue for those kind of approaches?
I think they're a reaction to excessive estimating, excessive planning. And I've written about this essentially probably since my estimating and planning book, been talking about it at conferences since the early 2000s, that you want to estimate so that you can make a decision. You don't estimate just for the hell of it. I mean, estimating can be a useful activity. Planning can be useful, but they can very easily cross over into waste. And I don't want to have a team waste time estimating just so the boss has a number they can beat us up with later, right? Or so the boss can, sleep at night, right? And the boss probably was a developer who was asked to estimate when he or she was younger, and now they ask their team to estimate out of habit, right? And no, you estimate so you can make a decision. And if no one is going to use the estimate to make a decision, then don't estimate, right? It's a waste of time. And that's where I'm on board with the no estimates thing. A lot of the no estimates people are, I don't know, it's the world's most clickbait title because it's not really about no estimates, about fewer estimates in most cases. And totally on board with that. Estimate to make a decision. Don't estimate just to have a number.
Yeah, I remember years ago that I actually went to a local meetup group here in my home area, and Woody Zool was there, and he was talking about the no estimates kind of approach to things. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm ready to fight this guy. Like I had never met Woody before, and I thought, I'm an estimates kind of person. I think estimates make sense, and I'm ready to, have that discussion. Right. But and then Woody comes out and he's this nice guy. He's like everyone's grandfather. He's just a kind person. He's one of the kindest people I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts talking about it. And I remember writing in my notebook from that session that it seems to me like the sum of this is really estimate when there's value to estimating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, I agree with that. I don't have any problem with that.
Hashtag fewer estimates doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's a clickbaity thing to get attention, and that's fine. I mean, Kent Beck acknowledged when he called it extreme programming that it was going to get a lot of attention, right? That was
Right.
why he named it extreme programming, to get attention on his process. So there's no problem with that, but it does harm when people don't really understand the nuance and think that it means we throw all estimates out. Estimates can be helpful. We just don't want to overdo it.
Yeah, it's kind of like it wouldn't be quite as much of clickbait to say Agile is done wrong. It's much better to say Agile's dead, and then I'll explain to you why it's really just Agile done wrong. Yeah. Well, back to thinking here about estimation a little bit. I know that you've been talking about this for a long, long time, and this has been something that has evolved a little bit. And I want to kind of focus a little bit on that for a portion of this show to talk about really how thinking on this has evolved over time. So, has your thinking on estimating and planning changed over the years, especially recently?
There's been a number of things. When I wrote my book on agile estimating and planning, I wrote it there were two chapters kind of in the middle. One was about story points, one was about estimating ideal days. And I was totally open through the rest of the book on either of those approaches working well for estimating. And I've really switched around on that, where I don't think talking about ideal days is a valid approach, because it just leads to too much confusion over whose day and things like that. And so I like the abstraction layer of a story point. I think one of the mistakes I made in that book was not being clear enough about what story points really are. I mean, I did write it in there, but I just didn't, go over it again and again to really make the point clear. And it's led to a lot of confusion where people just think, story point is a day and crap like that. And that's really caused a lot of harm in the agile world. And I'll go into companies, oh, we do story points, set one story point equals a day. And it's like, no, you can't do that. Well, we were trained by somebody who said they read your book or something. Um, and it definitely does not say that. So I've become more adamant about trying to help people understand what story points really are. And they're a measure of effort, where effort is defined as a combination of complexity, risk, uncertainty, and volume of work. We got to mix all four of those factors together and come up with some sort of effort estimate. And that wasn't clear enough in some of my early writing. Another big thing that I've changed in how I think about estimating is a little bit more tactical. It's about sprint planning. And I was pretty adamant for a long time. I think maybe I'm just rationalizing, but I was pretty adamant for a long time about how teams should create a sprint plan that included a list of activities and quick estimates, often referred to them as just guesses, but an estimate for each of the activities on a sprint backlog. And I'm quite open these days to teams not doing those estimates of sprint backlog items. I still do recommend teams start with estimates on their sprint backlog items until they prove to themselves they're good at it, right? But once you're good at it, you don't necessarily need to put a number on there. But I never intended those numbers to be much more than guesses, right? I mean, they were literally 30-second things. They weren't like big discussion estimates.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this yet, but if you're listening along to this and are interested in this topic, we did put together a PDF for this episode as well that you can download. Look in our show notes. It's really kind of a field guide to estimating and planning here in 2026. So just know that that's there in our show notes. Mike, I agree. I think there's an aspect of this that when it comes up in classes, I actually have started begging people to kind of do something here, and that is that if you're making that connection, if your organization has a story point equals this amount of time, no matter what that is, hours, days, whatever it is, my beg that I make in classes, just estimate in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't had anyone, and so this is a challenge to the audience here. If anyone knows of a benefit of making that conversion, then please let me know. But I don't know what the benefit is. It's just confusing to the developers. If, hey, this is going to take me about, I don't know, 10 hours, and if a story point equals 6, let me do the math.
Yeah.
Like I just don't know what the benefit is.
There is no benefit. That's just extra complexity, right? If you're estimating in hours, just use hours and don't be apologetic about it. We're estimating in hours. And that can work for some teams. Where that becomes a problem is when you have the superstar and the junior intern, right? because the superstar says 2 hours, the junior intern says 2 decades, right? I mean, they're just not going to agree on if he's that bad, if she's that bad, or whether or not our junior intern. But if somebody says 2 hours and somebody else says 20 hours, how are they going to come to agreement, right? They can't, right? But the superstar and the junior intern can, now we're dealing with the extremes here, look at things and say, this thing will take twice as long as that other thing, right? And that's the benefit to points.
Absolutely agree. Well, then let's reframe it a little bit. Let's reframe estimation. If it's not really about prediction, what would you say it really is for? What do we use estimation for?
To make the decisions that we've talked about, right? You want to estimate so that you can make a decision. Um, Put a product backlog item, and we call it 3 points. And the product owner says, 3 points, cool, I want that thing. If we had said that thing was 20 points, the product owner might say, man, that's too much, right? It's not worth 20 points. And so that quick estimate on a product backlog item lets a team know, or lets the product owner know how much they want the thing, right? It's desirable, but not at that price, right? I'd like a Ferrari, not at that price, right? So it helps us make those decisions. We put a estimate, if we do it in sprint planning, if we put an estimate on a sprint backlog item, say a programmer says this will take 8 hours and the tester says it'll take 12 hours, the programmer might say, wow, 12 hours to test that, is there anything I can do to make that easier for you to test? Well, if you coded me a couple hooks, I could cut the testing time in a fourth. Oh, let's code those hooks in there. And we add an hour to the programming time and we cut the testing time by 75%. So those estimates can help us make decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's kind of the focus is on the purpose and what are we trying to accomplish with this? And if it's to make a decision, then yeah, we should keep that as our central focus. Is it possible then to make those kind of decisions without estimation?
That's a great question. It's a subtle one. This is where, I will have arguments to people that are kind of opposed to estimating, and they'll say things like, "Oh no, we don't estimate. We make all of our product backlog items the same size." Well, think about what's going on in someone's head to make all their backlog items the same size. They're looking at a new item and saying, is it the same as all the others? No, it's too big. I better split it up. Okay, let me split it up. Now let me split it up and I got to make the new splits about the same size, right? They're implicitly estimating, right? Whereas in my world, we might just say, okay, the bulk of our backlog are threes. This one's a little bigger. Let's call it a five, right? And we're done. It's easier, right? So I don't I mean, we're estimating all the time. You and I scheduled time to do this podcast recording. I had a doctor appointment about a half hour away from me this morning before we started recording. I had to estimate how long would my doctor take, how long it would take me to get home, things like that, right? So we're estimating all the time. We don't often talk about the estimates. They're just implicit in our head, but I don't think you can get away from estimating. You're doing it implicitly, whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah, I agree. And I've talked to some of those people who do that same thing, who say we get it all down to the same size, and so everything's a one. And my response generally is, well, that's great. I mean, if you can do that, then I think there's value in being able to do that. I can only speak from my experience. I haven't worked on a team where we've been able to get everything to the same size. There's just always some things that are bigger than others, and we can't split those things further. So that's why, for me, I think estimation's better. I mean, if I was on a team where we could get it all down to one, great.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
I'm with you. I'd rather have the thing where we say, okay, everything's 1 to 5, right? If that's what we want to do, right? We want to target things that are twos and threes. Of course, we have trivial things. Let's call them one, right? Of course, we have things that are a tiny bit bigger. We'll call them fives, right? That'd be a better approach to me. It'd be faster. Be faster.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to kind of another big area, because I know one of the things that people often talk about with estimation and planning is that it's anti-agile, that like it keeps you from being adaptable, and it's framed in that kind of light of it being, an obstacle to being adaptable. Do you think that's actually true?
It's a good observation. Some of the early days of Agile, there was a lot of talk about what do we call the enemy, right? And some of it was, it was Agile versus plan driven. It was Agile versus waterfall. What do we call the opposite? And plan driven was one of the ones that was discussed. And I don't think we want to be plan driven, right? I mean, we don't want to be driven by the plan, But I think a reasonable amount of planning, and again, it can easily be overdone. A reasonable amount of planning improves our agility or our adaptability. Think about a team that's planning to summit Mount Everest, right? They have no idea when they set out all of the conditions they're going to face, right? And the troubles that they're going to have, the obstacles they're going to encounter. And so they plan, right? They plan that the trip up the mountain might take longer than expected, right? They plan by taking extra supplies that they can use on the way down, right? And so that planning improves their agility and improves their ability to adapt to the conditions.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like this concept of the sooner we know about a problem, the more options we have to actually address that problem. And I think that's one of the things that this gives us in that kind of planning is that if we kind of can look ahead and see, well, this is a potential issue, well, now we can have more possible avenues to solve that problem rather than when we're right up against it. There's maybe only one way to deal with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I know one of the other areas that's kind of the hot button topic, or I hear this talked about quite a bit. I get asked about this in class, is kind of flow metrics. And I know that's a popular thing right now. So I'm sure people are kind of interested in your thought on that. From a flow metrics perspective, what do you think it does well, or what do you think it struggles with and falls short with as a way of planning?
I think tracking your flow is a great thing to do. I don't think it should be the only thing you do. When we have novel work, when we're doing something that's completely new, there's extra complexity there, and I don't think the flow metrics handle that as well. Um, so having kind of more traditional metrics, having estimates, and balancing them out, right, with the flow metrics is going to be the way to go. And this is the thing with any sort of metric or measurement. You never want to rely on just one thing, right? Think about, you get on an airplane and you look up and see how many controls or gauges the pilot has. It's like, holy cow, right? You wouldn't want to fly a plane with one gauge, right? You want to have multiple views of where you're at. And so flow metrics are a good supplement, but I think they help ground conversation. But I think more traditional estimating helps us think through the challenges that we can anticipate with work, especially novel work.
Do you think these two kind of complement each other, flow metrics and
Yeah.
estimating with some like story points?
Yeah, I think they can be a good balance, right? It's certainly useful to see how many items are flowing through our process, right? But it's also good to see, what the sizes of those things are.
Just want to mention again, if you're listening into this, we do have a PDF about this very topic that you can download in our show notes. So make sure you take a look at that if this is a topic you want to go a little bit deeper on. Let's talk a little bit about the human impact of this. What do you think happens, Mike, when teams when their planning and estimation are kind of stripped away entirely?
Well, this is a little bit back where we started, where I was saying the developers kind of say, what's in it for me, right? I estimate what's in it for me, right? I gave the boss a number, they're just going to beat me up with it. There's no benefit. So we need to get to a point where developers understand that estimating well or planning well, even more importantly, planning can be beneficial to them. Imagine a team that's just horrible at estimating. They're just horrible at estimating and planning. They're never right. And the business comes to that development team and says, "Hey, we need this in 3 months." And the developers say, "Can't be done. Can't be done." Well, I think the business has every right in the world to say, give it a try, right? Because this team's never been right in the past, right? If they say it can't be done in 3 months, maybe it can. Go give it a try, right? And so in those organizations, we see businesses, leaders putting a lot of pressure on the team to go do it anyway, go give it a try, make it happen. Now, imagine a different scenario where the team is good, not perfect. No team's perfect, but they're good. They say something will take 3 months. It takes almost 3 months. They come in a little bit early. The next thing they say it'll take 2 months, and say it takes 2.5. Again, they're not perfect, right? But they're pretty good, and they build up this track record of being pretty good. And now the business comes with that same new project and says, "Can we do it in 3 months?" And the team says no. Now the business is going to listen. They're going to say, "Oh, okay, it can't be done. What would it take?" And here's the key thing. What would it take for us to get it done in 3 months? Well, if you relax this one requirement, right? Or if we could stop doing second level support of the other product for 2 months while we work on this, right? If we had one more person, whatever it is, right? We had different tools. So, but now it's a collaborative discussion of what can we, stakeholders and team, do to achieve that 3 months, or maybe we can't do it in three, but we can do it in 3.5. And it's a collaborative discussion now. Whereas before, when the team was bad at estimating or planning, it was just a dictate, make it so, right? That's not a good position to be in. When we when we drop the planning or we just kind of give up on it, we're losing a way for teams to establish credibility.
Yeah. I think you're right that it has quite a lot of impact on just the morale of the team, and kind of how they approach the work and everything. This is kind of a bonus side question here for you, Mike. Just want to see what you'll do with this. But I know sometimes I will talk to leaders who say that their team is bad at estimating, that they don't estimate points well, that they want them to be better at estimating points. And I'm kind of curious what your take would be on that. Is it possible for people to be better or worse at estimating points?
Well, absolutely, but it depends on why they're wrong. So let's just talk about a few things there. Most common thing when I hear that a team is bad at estimating and they're using story points, it's probably because they do not have a solid understanding of what a point is, right? You've got people in there thinking that they're time. Other people are thinking they're just complexity, right? Points are not complexity. Complexity is a factor in the effort that is a point. So you end up with these funky, inconsistent, incompatible definitions, and that's of course going to lead to problems, right? So what I want to make sure people do is that they have a common understanding of what a point is. And if you sit in on a meeting like that and you ever hear somebody say, "Well, it's 5 points if I do it, but 10 points if you do it," you know they don't agree on what a point is, right? Because that's the antithesis of a point. And so I'd want to make sure they had a very clear definition of a point. And that's from teaching this for so many years, that's hard. There's this there's this magic point people have to get to with points, and I see this when I'm teaching. When they get it, it clicks, and all of a sudden, every single thing about estimating makes sense, right? Everything makes sense. But they have to get this magic inflection point. And I contrast that with something like stories and backlog management that I teach as well. Those are like golf, right? You can always get better at writing stories. You can always get better at splitting. Right? They're very linear skills. Just keep getting better at those things with practice. Estimating, there's this magic point, and you have to get the team members, ideally all of them, at least a majority of them, to that inflection point. If we've done that, there's all sorts of things that we can do to get teams to create better estimates. I'll just share two. One is a technique called unpacking. What unpacking entails is discussing the components of the work, right? Oh, to do that big feature, we'd have to do this and this and this and this, right? Don't necessarily write them down, but just talk about them and then go back and estimate the big things. So don't estimate the small things. The unpacking refers to identifying those small things. So you unpack the big thing, identify the sub steps, and then re-estimate the big thing. That has been shown through academic studies to be a way to improve estimate quality. Another thing that teams can do if they're bad at estimating is to make sure they agree on what they're estimating. And you might have somebody on your team who's very conservative, very nervous, and they're estimating kind of the worst case scenario, right? Not normally at the worst case scenario, but kind of like the 90% scenario, right? They're thinking about all sorts of things going wrong. You might have somebody else on the team estimating the most likely scenario. Well, most likely will be done in 3 days, right? You might have other people in there thinking about the median estimate, the kind of 50-50 number. 50% of the time it'll take more, 50% of it will take less. These are all different numbers. And if you have that going on a team, you're going to have fights, you're going to have arguments. And so if you're in with a team and you see them having big discrepancies in their story values because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to see what your answer was on that, because I know a lot of times I get that question in classes as well.
I can go on and on. I think I've got a video of about, like, 5 things to do to get better and 4 things to stop doing that'll get you better.
That's awesome. Well, that kind of naturally leads us talking about the misuses of this as well, because I think a lot of times that's where a lot of the problems come from, is just sort of a misunderstanding or misusing of story points. I know for one, I always know that there's a misunderstanding, a misuse when I hear developers talking about, I want to get credit for the work from this sprint. I know that there's a misunderstanding or misuse of them. If the misuse of these is so widespread, why do organizations keep asking for story points then?
Because I mean, I don't know that organizations ask for story points. Organizations ask for plans, right?
Well, that's
Give me
true.
a
That's
date,
true.
right? Give me a date, right? When will you be done with this stuff? And it's because, I mean, that's, to a large extent, that's how organizations run. And, we can pretend that it should be, well, we'll just deliver features as fast as we can, but there's often other parts of an organization that need to coordinate with the release of something, right? We might need to train users on it. We might need to update website documentation about the new features, all sorts of things. And so having some sort of plan, it doesn't have to be very far into the future, but some sort of plan is extremely helpful.
Do you think estimation can become harmful in an organization, and what kind of things would signal that it's it's taken on a harmful turn?
Well, that's when you're running around beating the team up with the 5 and the 8 that I mentioned, right? When estimates are used to punish developers, right? When exceeding an estimate is viewed as a bad thing, right? It's an estimate. You're going to be over, right? And I just talked about most likely median and 90% case estimates. I recommend teams estimate at a 50% level. Now we do that so that we can plan at more of like a 90% level. But individual estimates, if we're doing them at a median, that means we're going to be off half the time, right? If we do it well, we're going to be off half the time. And most teams will be off a little bit more than that because they're not particularly good yet. And so we have to, in some ways, celebrate the fact that some of our estimates were over, right? What we want to have is a process where we have some over, some under, and they balance out, right? And that's where a lot of teams go astray. So I think punishing people for high numbers, punishing teams for high variance in their work. I have tracked hundreds of teams, which means thousands of sprints. And what I noticed was that a typical velocity for a team will bounce around in a plus or minus 19%. That's very precise. So let's round it up and call it 20, plus or minus 20% range. What that means is if you got a team that averages 20 points, next sprint they might get 24, the next after that they might get 16. And those are not good and bad news. They're just random statistical variance or variability. And when a team is bouncing around in a range like that, that's a good thing, right? And you don't want to punish a team for, oh no, you were 2 points under, you only got 18 done. It's like, yeah, that's random variation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does have the propensity to be misused. And I do think that there are a lot of situations where it has been misused. And people come out of those situations and think, oh, estimation itself is bad. But it's not really the estimation, it's the way you're doing it that really ends up being the problem.
Yeah, they're just numbers. It's all about how the numbers get used, and that's normally a failure of leadership intent, right? In how the leaders are intending to use those numbers rather than of the estimates or the team themselves.
Yeah. I kind of think about this in the terms of like when you see adult beverage ads, it always says, drink responsibly. And so I kind of think about that with this as well, not drink responsibly, but use responsibly.
Estimate responsibly.
Right. Estimate responsibly.
Maybe that's your show title this time.
Yeah. Estimate responsibly. What would you give as advice to estimate responsibly?
We haven't talked about this, but I think one of the important things is to think about estimates as ranges, right? And think about plans as ranges, right? The team that I mentioned climbing Mount Everest, I mean, they might have a day they intend to summit, but they're probably looking at a range of days they're going to summit depending on the weather when they get close to the summit, right? And so use a range. So, if we say we're going to finish something, we're going to be done in, 2 to 3 months or 2.5 to 3 months, or we're going to be done in 4 to 5 sprints, things like that. Or we'll be done in 4 sprints, but it'll have between this and that much functionality, right? Use ranges on things. Don't overdo it with estimating. Estimate only if something's going to make a decision. And I think it's very fair for team members to say, would ask for an estimate, very fair for team members to say, cool, we'll do that. We'll do that. By the way, how will this number be used? Right? Oh, I don't know. I just need an estimate. It's like, we're not estimating then. So estimate if there's a reason, right? And I do think that teams can get better at estimating. Most teams don't give their own little feedback loops Why were we off on that estimate? Talk about that in a retrospective, right? Why did we miss a plan? I think it's useful in estimating to state our assumptions, right? What are we assuming will go right? Right? If we're summiting Everest, I assume that we're going to have good weather one day during the third week that we're on the mountain, whatever. Right. So I think we have to think about things like that and use the estimating sessions as an opportunity to discuss the work, because that's the real benefit, is the improved and shared understanding that comes out of those discussions. I've literally done this with teams where this was a sprint planning meeting I'm thinking about, where we had a Google sheet up. We put all the estimates in the Google sheet for the estimates for the sprint backlog. And at the end of the meeting, I deleted all the numbers. I just deleted that column, and the team members are kind of pissed because I'd made them estimate the numbers. And they said, "Why did you have us do that?" And I said, "I don't care about the numbers. I just cared if we put the right amount of work in the sprint. And those numbers were there to help us put the right amount of work in the sprint." There we
Yeah,
go again. They were about making a decision, right? Those numbers helped us make a decision. Do we have the right amount or not? And I didn't want the numbers to remain, because then people were going to feel like, "Oh no, I said 4 hours to code that thing and it's going to take me 5. I'm going to feel bad, or I better rush and be sloppy." So I knew that was kind of a propensity of that team. So I deleted the column, right? I said, "This isn't important anymore. We got the benefit out of those numbers. We're done." So,
I love that. I love that because I think that builds trust as well. Because of the reason you said, you're not going to hold someone to 5 hours if they said 5 hours. It takes what it takes,
yeah,
and we just learn from it.
yep.
Well, I know this is as we kind of wind this down. There's a lot of hot button topics on this. I'm sure every time you talk about this, your inbox gets flooded with different opinions and hot takes on this kind of stuff.
And
Uh,
insults and all sorts of things.
right,
Yep.
exactly. Please be kind, everyone. Please just be kind, right? It doesn't cost you anything to be kind.
Just don't insult my mother. You can insult me, don't.
Right, right. But I think the thing I'd want to ask you, Mike, is as we kind of wrap up, is if you could give a message to those listening, the Agile community in general, on estimation, to help them kind of better understand this, or maybe set right something that's not really correct on this. What would be your one message you'd want people to take away and hear from this?
My one thing.
Yeah, your one thing.
Probably that estimating and planning don't eliminate uncertainty. We're not estimating so that we can predict the future. We're estimating so that we can make decisions. And when we estimate and talk about the uncertainty in items in work, it allows us to navigate that uncertainty. It allows us to create plans to get around it, right? We can document those assumptions. We can create a plan together to get around it. But we're not going to eliminate uncertainty, and that's absolutely not what estimating is about.
Yeah, I love that. I love distilling it down to just making decisions. I think that's a great way to put it, because there's a lot of decisions we make from them, but those those are all kind of the driving point of it. We're doing it for this purpose, and if you don't keep that in mind, you can really get screwy with these things.
Yep. If it won't help you make an estimate, or if it won't help you make a decision, don't estimate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on. Now, again, everyone, if you want to read more about this, look in our show notes, find the PDF for this one, and it'll give you some more insight and information on this. So, Mike, thanks for making time for us and coming on the show again.
Thanks as always, Brian.